Hey everyone, welcome back to ParaMystic Podcast. As I mentioned in last week's episode, we are trying something new for this week. So, welcome to Storytime, ParaMystic Storytime with Kristina Bloom. And I want to talk to you about today. I want to tell you kind of the paranormal history of my grandparents' house. So, I will be sharing some pictures and bringing those up as I am telling you the story. So here we go. I'm going to introduce you to my grandparents first. And let's see. Let's see how this works. Apparently, I don't know what I'm doing. These are my grandparents, Howard and Dolores Swenson. They built a house in Stone Park, Illinois in the late 1930s, I believe it was, based on my mother's birth date. And my grandfather was an electrician by trade, and he was very skilled with pretty much everything. And I know that he had at least started digging the basement by hand of the original part of the house. I will be bringing that up too, a picture of that as well, in its current form. But the house was built in Stone Park, Illinois in the late 30s. And as my grandfather was digging the basement, I remember seeing a box he had, like a cigar box that had a bunch of arrowheads and things like that in it. There's a picture of the home as it is today. And I spent a lot of time there as a child, particularly in the summers. My cousins lived across the street behind, there was an alley, and they were on the other side of the alley. So I spent quite a bit of time there as a child. My cousins were about the same age as me. So I always had like an automatic friend group whenever we went down there. I do know that there has always been paranormal activity in the house. There was a spirit in the basement that everyone just called Sam, Native American spirit, which makes sense considering the arrowheads and other things that my grandfather, I don't remember specifically what the other things were, but I know that there were some artifacts that he kept in a box that I remember seeing as a child. The basement particularly was very active and a little bit creepy, but it was just an interesting way. As you can see that there's a connecting room that was built on later, and the garage, and you went through the garage to get into the basement. And in the basement was my grandfather's workshop, in the back of the basement, where he worked as an electrician, repairing TVs, that sort of thing. He also wired homes, so he wired this one. And he also was always busy. He had a work van. I remember going places with him. And ironically, my grandfather was a colorblind electrician, which always makes things interesting considering you have to use different color wires as you are working with electricity. But I would go with him sometimes when I was about 9 or 10, and we would work on, I don't know what it was. I don't remember the specifics, but we would be at other people's homes and working on different things. So as we were working on different things, I was learning more about what he did and who he was. And he was also very hard of hearing. So I got used to reading lips at a very early age, because even though he had a hearing aid, it was very difficult for him to hear, particularly if there was any background noise. So as we were working and coming back, I would always notice that there were lights on in the basement, even though I remembered we turned them off. But remember, I said his work area was in the back of the basement. As we walked into the basement, there was some storage on the right and a washer and dryer on the left. And it always seemed, and windows, there were some windows right above the washer and dryer. And it always seemed a little bit weird to me how the light would change Even if we didn't turn on the light would change when we walked into the room. It would get brighter. And I asked my grandmother about it one time, and she said, "Oh, that's just Sam." So Sam being the spirit in the basement. And I just remember always feeling like there was something weird going on. Now, there was a room in between where the washer and dryer was and my grandfather's workroom. And it must have been a utility room. I really don't remember much about it because I would run through there as fast as I could. I did not like the energy in that room. I didn't like the way it felt. I didn't like, I don't know, even with lights on, it seemed darker for some reason. So I didn't like that room. It was always a little bit weird to me. So that's kind of the history of the house. It was obviously built on some sort of native land, well, as we all are here in the United States. But I just remember that being there, and I remember the Native American spirit in the basement. My mom told me a story, and her bedroom was on the second floor of the house. And I remember her telling me a story about, you can see those two dormer windows in the picture there. That was my mom's bedroom. And she said that when she was a kid, there was always a lady wearing a cloak that always stood in the corner of her room by her closet. And it bothered her, obviously, as a child. Should probably always say that my grandfather's mother also lived there. She was part Alaskan Native and part Swedish. So she lived there as well. And she and my grandmother did not get along. So I just remember hearing those stories, like they just did not get along. And let's see if you can see it. That front window on the bottom was my great-grandmother's bedroom. So when I was a kid, though, my great-grandmother had passed away long before I was born. And that was her bedroom when she was there. But now it was a home office. When I was a child, it was a home office. My grandmother took care of all the books and everything for the business. And I know some of you, if you followed my show at all, you've probably heard the story about how I would have dreams as a child and walking into my grandparents' home office that had a hospital bed. That's the room that it happened in my dreams, where I would walk in to that room and kiss my great-grandmother on either the cheek or the forehead and then pull a sheet over her head. Now, at the time when I was starting to have these dreams as a toddler, I did not know who she was. I just know that it made me sad and I would cry. And that was the grandmother who had the connections to Sweden. In fact, she never really spoke much English. Swedish was her native language, and that's what she always spoke. So when I would have those dreams, someone in Sweden who we were related to, who I never knew, would have passed away within a few hours of when I had the dream. And it happened about a half a dozen times when I was a kid. So that was one of the paranormal things in there. But what my mom told me recently is that as soon as that grandmother passed away, the lady in the room also disappeared. She never saw her again. So I think that that's kind of interesting. I don't know what the connection was. I'm sure that it was probably like my mom's great-grandmother or something like that, because she went away as soon as my great-grandmother passed on. My great-grandmother, Hilda Kristina, that's where my name came from. I've always had a connection with her because of those dreams, and because I feel like she probably had a lot of the same sort of gifts that I do. I feel like she made it in this country with 3 boys and no husband. Her husband wandered off one day and just never came home from work. So she was raising 3 boys on her own in Chicago and not speaking English. But she made sure that her boys spoke English. I will have to say my grandfather, who passed from Alzheimer's, late in his late years, he switched back and forth between Swedish and English a lot. So I did hear him speak some English, or I'm sorry, some Swedish, but I didn't know what he was saying. My grandmother passed away my mom's mom passed away when I was in my early 20s. And that is when we found out that my grandfather had Alzheimer's and my grandmother had been covering for him. She also was born with a congenital heart issue. So she had open heart surgery as a child. I don't know how often, but it seemed like every 10 or 15 years or so, she had to get a new pacemaker put in. Um, she chose not to replace it the last time. She was just tired of going through it, and I don't blame her. It's exhausting to live that way. But after she passed away, the paranormal activity in the house really ticked up a lot, especially shortly after she passed away, which was in the autumn. And my mom found out that her father, my grandfather, had the Alzheimer's, and he was doing all kinds of weird things like people with Alzheimer's do. He was completely lost. And then when I moved in, he was completely confused, because when my grandmother was younger, like in her 20s, when they got together, we looked a lot alike. I looked a lot like her, and it was somewhat confusing to him. But with my grandmother's spirit being there, she was trying to calm him down and, try to explain to him that that wasn't her, and he would get confused, understandably confused because of that. My grandmother always wore a house dress and penny loafers. And I found a picture of penny loafers. So let's see if that pops up. There we go. Her shoes looked very much like that. And she always wore those. So we were not surprised to find a few pairs of those in the closet after she passed. After that, when we were getting ready for Thanksgiving to try to keep things as normal for my grandfather as possible shortly after my grandmother's passing, I had moved in to help my mom. My mom was an only child, and she needed help. So I moved in and did my best to help. So we were taking care of him and working opposite shifts so that we could keep money coming into the household and still take care of him, because somebody had to be there with him at all times. So when I don't remember what I was doing, but my mom reminded me that when we were moving some boxes around in her closet, in my grandmother's closet, somebody moved her shoes, and there was like a burn mark on the floor underneath where her shoes were that never went away. And I had totally forgotten about that. The other thing I did remember, though, was that shortly after I moved in, I kept hearing shoes on the stairs, and I went and looked, and the shoes were literally walking down the stairs from the second level where the bedrooms and the main bathroom were, down to the first level. And I was just standing at the top of the stairs watching these shoes walk down the stairs. It was the craziest thing. And when it got to the bottom, it sounded like there was a door at the bottom, because the staircase emptied out into the dining room. And I heard the door open, but no light came through. They always kept the door shut. But I heard the door open, but the door did not physically open. I thought that was kind of amazing that I was able to watch the actual shoes walk down the stairs, but they stayed on the bottom step because they didn't go through the door. And that was a very weird thing for me. So that Thanksgiving, my mom had asked me to set the table, and my grandparents had a table pretty much like that. It was darker. It was stained darker, but it was pretty much like that. It was a big oval table with extra leaves. And when the whole extended family came, then there was quite a few more people. So my mom had asked me to put a tablecloth on the table. So I went into the buffet and got out a tablecloth and it was still folded, but I got called into the other room for some reason. I don't remember what it was. So I just grabbed one, set it on the table. And nobody else was in that room the entire time I was out of it, which was maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. And when I walked back into the room, there was a different tablecloth on the table. And I went into the kitchen to ask my mom about it. And she goes, "Yeah, that was my mom's favorite one." And I'm like, "Oh, well, she switched it out while I was in here helping you with whatever." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm not surprised by that." So it was just interesting that that would happen, that my grandmother would literally switch out the tablecloths. I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear the drawer open. I didn't hear any of that. But when I came back, there was a different tablecloth sitting on the table, folded up, and it was the one she wanted used. There was so much of that kind of stuff that went on. My mom also told me that she had a brother who died in infancy. And I had forgotten about that, actually. I did at one point know about it. Um, but she said that he was talking to her after their mom passed, that he was there and talking and trying to help with her dad, which was interesting because he showed up to her as an adult. And even when we sold the house and moved out, she said that he wanted to stay behind to protect the people who were moving into the house, which I found interesting. One more thing about the basement and Sam, the ghost in the basement. I went down there one time, and my mom's dog, which was a small tan lab, went down with me. She always did. She always went down into the basement with me. And I got the door open. The door would stick a little bit. It was kind of a creepy door with a glass in it, but it was at the bottom of a half a flight of stairs. And it would stick a little bit. So I jimmied with it and got it open. And we walked in. I walked in, and the dog walked in behind me and then went around to the front of me. And it was the weirdest thing because I saw her fur move like someone was petting her with an invisible hand. And she felt it. She yelped. She ran upstairs, and that dog never went in the basement again the whole rest of the time that we were there. Also, when we were clearing out the garage, and my grandparents lived in this house for 48, 49 years, maybe 50 years, and they had never cleaned out anything. There was so much stuff that we had to go through. And my then boyfriend came down from Wisconsin with one of his friends to help clean out the garage. And as we were cleaning out the garage, moving stuff from the garage to the basement and back and for whatever, I don't know, whatever my mom wanted us to do. So my boyfriend went down. He had his hands in holding a big box, and his friend was right behind him holding a big box. And my boyfriend couldn't get to the handle to turn the handle to get into the basement. And so he just went, "Hey, Sam, would you open the door, please?" And the door opened. Pretty common, actually, for us. It was nothing weird for us. So his friend dropped the box that he had. He was standing about 2 steps up, and he dropped the box, ran out of the garage and off the property, and refused to even go back on the property again because it freaked him out because Sam opened the door. We all still laughed about it. Like years later, we were still laughing about it because it just really freaked him out. And it was kind of funny because there was nothing nefarious going on. It was just the door opening, but it really freaked his friend out. The last thing that I want to tell you about is that my grandfather, for at least my entire life, had a Christmas cactus. And it was huge. It sat in the formal living room in the front of the house. The room people don't use, the people used to have rooms like that. Well, I guess some people still do, but no one ever used that room. And it was just very strange. But in the corner of that room was a Christmas cactus, and it was huge, really big, like a lot bigger than the picture that I just popped up. And a few years later, after my grandfather passed away, when my grandfather died, so did the Christmas cactus. It was a very weird thing. I don't know the origin story of where it came from, but the day he died, so did the plant. So there's some stories about the haunted house that I grew up with. I would love it if you would send me some stories, and I would be happy to read them on the air for you. I think that this is a possibility for a new podcast in addition to ParaMystic podcast, which I am going to keep with having guests and different topics. But if you have stories about cryptids, paranormal activity, near-death experiences, anything like that, and you want to send me those stories, I would be happy to read your story on the air and start a new podcast. So if this is something that you are interested in, you have found this to be an interesting show, interesting stories, please, in the comments, write yay or nay or yes or no. If you're interested, yes or yay. If you're not interested, no or nay. And put those in the comments so that I can determine whether or not it's worth starting another show. But I have enjoyed telling you these stories, and I hope that you have a great week, and I will see you next week with Lee Triana Brown.